I've seen virtual coursework be such a help to a lot of student athletes. There are cases where I think virtual coursework is great, right? It provides a needed alternative way of getting your education. I worry, however, how many of our school avoidant kids are kids who in the past, the guidance counselors were kind of like, whoa, hold the phone. We got a major problem here, everybody. This kiddo is not coming to school. This kiddo is now on a full slate of BLACs or a full slate of some other online coursework. And how do we know whether, is this a help to our kids? Is this medical leave a help to our kids? Is this online course a help to our kids? And when is it that we are simply masking a deeper problem, like giving a handful of Advil to a kid who actually needs something serious fix, right? So those are my observations.
Or like how much of that is socially sanctioned avoidance and accommodation.
Yeah.
Right? And I think you're spot on with the idea of what are we missing, right?
Yeah.
And that's really the question. So when someone is out of school, out of actual physical school now, and they're just doing online, as Zach, you and I have talked about, because we were just talking about that sort of developmentally, what are they missing? That, and what are the teachers missing in terms of being able to witness, not just are they picking up content or not, but what are their social interactions like, right? I mean, if you think about being in school or out of school and all of the opportunity or lack thereof, that goes beyond just learning about history, right? Or learning math, right? It's all the other social and developmental things that are occurring.
Yeah, I mean, school is really work for kids at a very developmental age, and it's a place where they play. It's a place where they watch peers and they learn how to, oh, that person interacted that way to that situation. Maybe that's a way I could do it. It's a place for them to try on different personalities, different sense of self, right? Like I'm an athlete, or I'm this, or I'm that, I'm a jock, or I'm like to do theater, or I like to do board games and things like that. And you're sort of trying on different identities and figuring out who you are. School is really a place for self-exploration, more in addition to actually getting education and sort of moving through the education system. But when kids are at home, they're missing that whole other holistic component to what the school environment is sort of designed to provide.
And to touch on something, Kate, that you brought up earlier in terms of someone goes on medical leave and they go home and we notice their symptoms decrease. That makes absolute sense, because there were things at school that were anxiety provoking, that were challenging. So we talk about as opportunity, and also it can be hard, right? And then when you go home, you don't have any of that, right? You're more isolated. You may have just more comfortability with being home, right? So of course your distress is going to go down. And are you really learning how to cope with your anxiety, how to deal with it, right? How to live with it? Or are you just sort of avoiding and isolating?
So what are the dangers in regard to that, both from a therapeutic standpoint and an academic standpoint, of having that avoidance? So because it does become an easy solution now, since COVID, there has been an explosion of online opportunities. So it makes it very easy to say, okay, we'll just remove the problem. And then, like Tim, you said, everything seems better in terms of symptom alleviation, but in terms of what you're essentially doing is not only are you missing out on these important developmental steps that you're talking about, but you're also avoiding actually confronting the problem. So what will happen longer term? Sooner or later, you're going to have to confront the problem. What does that delay do?
I think, I know, Kate, you and I have talked about this in the past, which has been presented on this. Even if we think about accommodations, well, you didn't finish your assignment on time, so we're just going to give you extra days and days and days, when really that may not be the issue. The issue is not actually about the amount of time, it's how you're using that time, or if it's procrastination, or if it's perfectionism, right? And so just adding more, it just gets back to that point of, well, eventually it's going to catch up, right? You know, and that's the same thing with the school avoidance and being at home. Yeah, you're going to avoid, you're going to see that your stress decreases, and then it's going to come back, because you still have to go to school, or you have to take the test at some point, or you have to demonstrate your knowledge at some point, right?
I mean, ultimately, we grow up and we work with people.
Yeah.
We work with people, and even if your work is going to be, you know, a lot of work from home, or whether it's what the work environment used to look like, or some of these newer hybrid models, I think what you're getting at is the idea of taking feedback from people.
Yeah.
And when you are learning from a computer, you know, and there are so many different models. I don't want to lump all of them into the same category, right? There are a lot of different ways of doing online curriculum, and a lot of them can be really effective. I think where it gets really dangerous is when it's the only thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I'm so much more comfortable if I know, okay, you know, a student is doing all of these courses at school, and they're doing this course virtually because of their ski season, or because they really want to study this topic, or something like that. When you remove that feeling of the teacher in the room, right? Education from the anxiety angle is almost never about the material you're learning. It's almost always about pleasing the teacher, versus I will not read this unless it's my idea, or any of the really nuanced kind of profiles that we see at Mountain Valley. We work with our kiddos here. So Everett, you mentioned the danger of the online coursework. I think it is really a situation where kids who want to do it over and over and over, they will crawl through that online course. And if we go to like what we do about this, it's like benchmarks, right? To say, if you are doing online courses, are you turning your work in? Are you on track? Are you going out of the house? Are you doing other things? Or is this a situation where your child is honestly sitting at home staring at a screen and just spinning in their head? You know, those are really different, and they can look awfully similar. So it's a little scary sometimes, I think.
And that doesn't help with academics, right? If you're just separate, and it also doesn't help with treatment of anxiety. And it doesn't help with engaging with sort of other developmentally expected tasks that can lead to more growth.
Yeah, and then, you know, there's just the whole concept of embodied cognition too, right? And that you need to be, your body needs to be engaged in order to learn, right? Our bodies, we don't just learn with our brains, we learn with we're one big sensory organ from our toes to our fingers, and our whole bodies learn things. It's the whole reason behind a lot of these other different methods of teaching, like Montessori schools, and different ways of sort of really engaging people in a task to sort of learn, kinesthetic learners. And a lot of younger kids, and when they're younger in adolescence, really learn by trying on the education that they're learning. And it's hard to do that when you're not in the classroom actually embodying a lot of that education.
And we were just talking with some of our teammates yesterday about they're choosing to go to more experiential colleges, or really, you know, taking the path less taken, and just speaking to how much they were able to learn from that. And it's not always the traditional, and it's not always what feels safe, right?
And the other thing too, I think sometimes people, like, we talk about screens not being healthy, but it's healthy if they're doing education. It's kind of like, well, there's some components staring at a screen and sitting in that position and all that kind of stuff is just not healthy, regardless of the content of the information that you're taking in. Like, whether you're on TikTok or you're reading your history book, if you're staring at a screen and you're taking in that light into your eyes, and your eyes are very dilated on something very close to you, triggers the stress response. It triggers a lot of other things. There's the whole ergonomic piece of not getting up and moving your body throughout the day. So there's I think there's a misconception about screen time only being bad if it's related to things like video games, TikTok, and social media. Whereas screen time is screen time, and there's something inherently not great about it from a standpoint of humans just weren't meant to sit in front of screens. We weren't designed that way.
100%. And to spin off just a little bit into executive function, as you know, we all know how much I love to talk about that, but
Yeah.
I think the ability to initiate a task,
Yeah,
right? That when, if you sit down in a classroom, you are waiting to figure out what is gonna come at you that day. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna bring this, I'm gonna pack this, I'm gonna get this out, I'm gonna hand this in. How different that is from a screen. When you wake up and sit down, you wake up, sit down, open up that screen, and you wait for life to come to you. And that lack of initiation is so big when you think about being able to go to college, being able to do a job interview, to be able to go out into the world and have a life where you feel joy.
Yeah.
It all, I know there are all the executive functions matter, but initiation is the one that I see the screens just, I mean, just really knocking it down. Like I really see kiddos just juniors, seniors, just sort of hapless, you know, in the classroom, just sort of like, I don't know what to do, and just sort of sit there. It's like, you can do something about it. You know, it really, it's really hard for this generation to do that. Yeah.
So I realized at the beginning, I forgot to mention that as we go, if you do have questions, please enter them into the chat function, and we will have some time at the end that we can address your questions.
I hope
But-
I have some. I really have questions.
So you did an excellent job of framing the problem.
Hmm,
So what do we do about it?
yeah. Well, I guess I get to talk first.
we're all looking at you, kid.
Well,
Got all the answers.
I mean, of course I do. No, I mean, honestly, it is, I feel as an educator as if I'm in uncharted waters this year in a new way, where I'm really watching and learning and seeing what the new sophomore looks like. What does the new junior and the new senior look like? At a very basic level, and I worry that this is going to sound too basic, but I think it's really important that we get back to our intuition a little bit, because we've had I don't want to beat the dead horse of COVID, but there have been a couple of years where we've taken all the normal adolescent instincts and said, no, don't do that. So it's been like, we're stay in our room, this is normal, stay 6 feet apart, this is normal. I noticed when my little one, who's 8, runs to see her friends, she comes to a screeching halt. They don't run and hug each other, they stop this far apart. And to just notice that now when an adolescent or a young person is in their bedroom and they're not coming out and they're not engaging socially, if that feels a little bit like, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel like what should be going on, and that's to pay attention to that matters. If a young person just sits in their bedroom and doesn't come out, that's not okay. And just because everyone else is anxious, that doesn't mean it's okay. It's not like algebra 2, where everyone's like, yes, we're all behind in math, yes, we all need to catch up, but there's no built-in progression of anxiety work that kids do. So my biggest thing would be like really paying attention to intuition about when we see our kids in their bedrooms, when we see them stuck on screens, and not being afraid to take that stance and to say, well, you're 3 months behind in your online course. I don't care if you're sitting in your room all day staring at your screen, something is the matter. And not just normalizing it. It's not okay. It may have become normal. That doesn't mean that it's healthy. There it is. Only I had that as soon as you looked at me. Just because it's normal doesn't mean it's healthy.
Well, I think partly it sounds like you're also talking about a shift in thinking societally.
Yeah.
In terms of, things were the way they were for a time, and now we're shifting. We're moving back towards, even if you are doing online stuff, let's question it, right?
Yeah.
You often talk about like let's poke holes in things, right? So not just taking things to be a given or a truth, but or a reality. Like let's actually examine it.
Right.
See where we're at.
If you're avoiding, if you don't want to do that, really think about why before we immediately go to saying like, well, you don't like this math class, great, we can solve this. Well, hold on.
Mhm.
Are we masking or are we?
Yeah.
Or are we rehabilitating
Yeah.
that fear?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think too, I think as a society, we had a whole pull it up by your bootstraps. There's no time to sort of be anxious or sad. You got to figure out a way to cope with your emotions and do the hard thing anyway. Then we totally took a drastic flip to like your emotions are totally valid. If you're feeling anxious, I'm here to support you, right? And now it's time to sort of marry those two approaches and find a way to validate the way kids are feeling and push them to engage. I know here at Mountain Valley, we talk a lot about the space approach. Pretty common with our parent coaching program, and that's all about saying, yes, I understand that you're anxious, and this is something we learned how, and this is something we have to learn how to work through, and how are we going to do that? And you know, I think a lot of parents out there are anxious themselves about responding to their kids' anxiety by saying, hey, you need to just push through this kind of thing, because there's been this narrative of like, you can't just push through emotion. We have to acknowledge it. We have to work with it. So I think it's just finding that balance between those two ends of the spectrum, I think is really important.
Love it. We got some shifting, we got some emotional regulation. So happy.
We have any questions? Not yet.
Okay.
No, can you talk a little bit about how ERP works in terms of anxiety and school refusal?
Yeah.
What form does that take on this particular topic?
Yeah, I think can go in a lot of different directions with that, but I always go first often to the assessment, right? So what is it about? What is actually behind the school refusal? For some people, it's more of just the social piece, you know, going to school, so focused on worry that others are going to judge me or think negatively of me, right? And so I can't do that. Is it a sensory issue? Right? Walk down the halls and it's, you know, I'm in a school with 2,000 other students and it's noisy and people are bumping into me, and that just, you know, sets off my, you know, me physically, right? And I can't deal with that.
Yeah.
Is it more the academic piece, right, where there's a perfectionism component? So, you know, even if I wrote the most, you know, beautiful, you know, descriptive, articulate essay ever, I can't turn it in, right? Because I want to tweak it a little bit, or I didn't say this thing perfectly, right? So I would really want to be getting at what's the heart of, you know, the anxiety that's leading to the avoidance, which is the school refusal, right? So I want to be assessing that, and then from there, you could actually start to, you know, design exposure opportunities. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, and I would say here we get at some of that in different ways too. We were just talking the other day about one of our modules we have here, which is an art-based module, and we were still getting at that sort of completism and the perfectionism. One of our counselors came up with an idea of setting a randomized timer and having the kids work on a collective art project, and you get to work on the art project, but you don't know when the timer is going to go off, and then when the timer goes off, you have to pass it to the next person. And for a kid who's anxious about needing to complete the thing fully or get the thing perfect before they hand it in or pass it off, that's a different way to get at that same sort of fear of wanting to be perfect or wanting to complete the thing. But it's in a different way that's a little bit more engaging and a little bit more removed from the actual natural consequences of handing in an essay or handing in an assignment. So there's different ways to sort of, if you can get at what the core problem is or the core fear is, you can work on it in a little bit separate from the actual academics and get the kids to start to understand the concept of, it's okay if I don't complete something, it's okay if I don't do something perfect, I can still hand it off to the next person kind of thing. And doing it in a way that's fun and creative and a little bit different and not as much pressure as an actual graded assignment.
Right. And I also think where, Kate, your team comes in is you can actually do things like graded assignments or not graded assignments. Right? We can sort of determine that based on, you know, our clients need at the time,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And you can ramp up the intensity of the academic work or decrease it, start slow and then increase it. And we're providing support, but we're also not accommodating that which is
Right.
unhelpful.
Right, and definitely in land of education, I feel like there are certain go-to things that as educators, we know we've got them in our back pocket, here's extended time, testing in a separate room, sometimes we go down and down that hole, and to a certain extent, I can see the value of, we have this unique brain that is so special, every one of them, and how do we find the best set of accommodations to support this kid that's going to help them actually demonstrate their knowledge in the classroom, but also being aware of how often anxieties and OCD safety behaviors just end up shrinking this kid's capacity down to nothing.
Right.
And that the one without the other
Mhm.
is a dangerous, it's
Mhm.
danger if it's too much in any one camp, right?
Right.
Because we want our kids to learn that they can work through challenge. I mean, and also to recognize that one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
So if you have a kiddo who, only has one challenge, which is slow processing speed, great, we can give extra time. But what if it's processing speed with ADHD? Well, then we've got a challenge, right? One's getting worse while the other's getting better. Or, what if we're dealing with OCD, where I remember one of our residents, had such complex safety behaviors around homework. And I shouldn't say one, I mean, so many. I was thinking of one in particular, but often comes in with a diagnosis of ADHD
Mhm.
because they seem like they can't stay on task, but that zoned out look, that's not distraction. That's that brain going through, counting backwards, reciting it, translating into different languages, all of these such raw fear that's been wrapped in these really illogical
Mhm.
safety behaviors that these kids are clinging to and going through these rituals. They cannot, there's no room left in their working memory to solve a problem.
Right.
And the sensory stuff that I've learned in working with Zack, powerful. When that sensory stuff is kicking up,
Mhm.
they're in that room taking a test. 80% of their working memory is on the sound of that chewing gum or the smell of that if you imagine, oh, that's background noise, just block that out. Not to them, it's not background noise. They're hearing that background noise like a screaming rock concert. To them, no one could concentrate until you get at that sensory stuff. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's real, I guess.
Yeah.
We have a question.
Oh, we have a question. Good.
What would you do to help at home with a child that is a perfectionist?
Mm,
What can people do in the home to help with this?
yeah. Should I start with that one?
Go for it.
My favorite, I will say I am a very perfectionistic human, so I speak from my own experience, but perfectionism, I would say if you envision like a jar, right? With a lid that you can screw on and you fill that jar with a gas and you imagine those gas molecules bouncing around in there. Perfectionism is like that. It will fill up whatever container you give it. So I think that working perfection is a beautiful, powerful thing. It's a wonderful thing, but you've got to right size it. So to say, okay, we're going to work on this paper and I'm going to give myself a topic, to think of that topic as a jar and to realize that the perfectionism will fill it. Make sure that that topic is very clearly defined. Make sure it's very specific and give it a timer and give it a page limit. And to say, this is the container that you get to fill with your beautiful soul, that beautiful perfectionistic desire to be amazing, but to put a boundary on it. Because if you give the perfectionist a room, they will fill it. If you give them a house, they will fill it. If you give them an airport, they will fill it. It never stops. So defining from the beginning, what is that jar? How are we going to right size this? Make sure that this kid is not trying to win the Nobel Peace Prize with their paper topic. Make sure that it's about, the mechanism of muscles in the grasshopper's legs, and that they will spend 1.5 hours on it, and that their paper is 3 pages. And if it's 4 pages, that's not okay. 4 pages isn't better? No, 3 pages. That is, you don't get to cheat out. The perfectionist is always pushing out. Give me more time, give me more room, give me more pages. No. You do not help the perfectionist
Right.
by giving them more room and space. So as a parent, please help the young me. Don't allow me to write 6 pages when 3 pages is what was needed. Don't type my paper for me.
I had similar feedback from getting some of the people on my dissertation committee and from grad school where they
Yeah.
just, you're working with a lot of people who could write 200-300-page papers and continue to add more research. Oh, this seems interesting. I
Yeah.
It's like, well, no, you just need to finish this.
Right,
And then you can do all the other things if you want to, but right now your task at hand is this.
yeah,
Right? And then being able to sit with if there's anxiety around, is it good enough?
Yeah.
Right? By not turning it in, you never get to actually experience that or confront that.
and you gotta
Right.
confront it.
And that's the thing, yeah. And you know, 3 pages versus the 4 page, that 4th page is avoidance.
Yes, oh my gosh, that's
Right.
true, right? And those teachers are gonna put stickers and stars on it, but for a lot of kids, that 4th page is a problem.
Yeah, I would say too, Tim, I think a lot of what you and your team do really well here too is getting at like, what's the core fear behind the perfectionism too, right? Like, if I'm not perfect, then what,
Right.
right? Like,
Yeah.
having the kid fill in that blank, like why do they feel the need to be perfect, and where is that coming from?
Mhm.
Do they not feel like they'll be worthy enough? Do they not feel like they'll make it to Harvard? Do they not feel, there's a lot of different reasons why,
And some of them are like, you hear them and you're like, really? Like, they're often really illogical
yeah.
to an adult mind, right?
Right,
Yeah.
and then they have to test it and find that logic for themselves, right?
Right.
It's like, you
Yeah.
think that this is what's gonna happen if you only turn in 3 pages, well, are you willing to try and see if that's what happens? And that's sort of how you can go about the exposure process at home.
Yeah.
But that reflective piece after the fact of,
Mhm.
did your fear come true? Did your feared outcome come true? Is super important for the kids to begin to reflect and learn, like, oh yeah, I thought that terrible thing was gonna happen and I still got an A, so it doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
And I know there's some perfectionists out there that will be like, I still got an A, and it still could have been better if I added that 4th page, but just that reflective learning piece is
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think unfortunately, we're out of time. So I want to thank Zack, Kayte, and Tim for your time and your insight today. Thank you for joining us. If anyone out there has any questions that come up later that you think we could be helpful in addressing with you, please feel free to contact us. If you're on this webinar, you likely have our website address, and you can find my contact info, Zack's contact info, and Tim's on the staff page of our website. And if there's anything Kayte can be helpful with, we can put you in touch with her.
Always
as
love
well.
to talk shop.
So again, thank you for joining us here today. We hope you found this helpful. And thank you again to our panelists.
This is fun.
Yeah.
Thanks
Bye,
for joining
everybody.
us. Bye.